Last time we talked about the inherent spirituality of this conversation, that it's not just nuts and bolts, that the egg represents divine femininity, that there was a prophecy that Chris Bledsoe had an experience with a being called Hathor. There's a lot of dots that I connect from Lue Elizondo and on the Sean Ryan show from my episode 1 of UAP Tube. This one, I want to go back to Jake Barber because I think he's a really important person to talk about here. He is basically the whistleblower that came out as of this year, 2025, year of our Lord. And he said, we are not just experiencing the nuts and bolts aspect of this phenomenon, we're using our minds to call these NHI and these craft in. Okay, so he basically was like, and he talks about it in a 3 hour interview with Jesse Michaels on American Alchemy about how this is just like not even a question to him. Like he's like, I don't have time to convince you that telepathy is real. Like it just is, and it's a part of my world, just like the way that this microphone is. Okay.
Through me.
And so what are psionic assets?
Um, when we look at collecting data, one of the areas that we look to collect data is through a psionic asset, which is an individual who's trained in remote viewing, psychic abilities, telekinesis, that type of thing, which is basically through a number of different protocols can transition into a place where they are highly sensitive to their environment from the point of view of consciousness through a consciousness field. And that is not a woo-woo topic. I know I'm just throwing it in, but it's so matter of fact to me that it's the same as saying night vision goggles. Like it's there, we
Right.
use it. And it's worked both on it's used both on the summoning side and the data collection side.
I thought that that's amazing that he's sort of given us this context. And I wanted to kind of like dig in a little bit about like what that all means, what that means practically for people, and how to kind of like how to spot it, basically. He talks a lot about his background. Growing up, he had some maybe trauma when he was younger, which is kind of why his grandfathers pushed him into the military. But he talks a lot about the abuse that he experienced as a kid. Um, with experiencers, there is a history of trauma. There's something that they're going through and their life is tumultuous and they start having experiences with the phenomenon, with orbs, with beings, with you name it. Okay. So I thought that was interesting. He also talks about a science project that he did when he was growing up that I thought was so beautiful. He was looking at the emotional connection to music and how music could bring out certain emotions in you. And he wondered if color could do the same, color combinations. He called it color chords. Okay, so this guy's a musical, creative thinker that went through some trauma when he was younger. And likely, like, this is all kind of like moving him through the procurement process of like FBI or CIA or like whatever intelligence circles that he was procured into. Um, I will say he goes in to talk about I just wanted to mention one thing. Yeah, no, he goes in and he kind of like talks about how um kids with trauma or with social pathology, social pathologies, like for example, autism, are have this gift. Um, I think that's really interesting because, like, obviously the telepathy tapes has been really big. I really hope this doesn't get shadow banned because I just said that. Um, I was listening to another podcast, Tetragrammaton, with Kai Dickens, who is the documentarian who did the telepathy tapes. And she was talking to Rick Rubin about the nature of consciousness, and that I believe it was Rupert Sheldrake who kind of pointed out that like consciousness precedes anything physical anyway. Like the idea of that painting the thought of that painting existed before it was actually painted. Do you get what I'm saying? So, like, the idea behind this microphone was present before the actual physical invention of the microphone. Which proves that consciousness, if you think about it in like a triangle, like consciousness is at the bottom, not vice versa, not physical reality. So anyway, I think that's really interesting that he talks about kids with social pathologies. So I'm making that connection too. He also says indigenous people, these people who have more access to nature and live cleaner lives, simpler lives, have an easier time tapping into this stuff, which kind of gets me into like, there's rumors about the Montauk Project, like Stranger Things is sort of based on that. Um, it sounds like it's true because Jake actually admits that they've been using kids. And Jesse asks him, like, are you okay with that? And he's like, no. He's like, I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with using kids. He goes on to like talk about how they, meaning maybe the defense contractors, I'm not sure who they is, but they can pull this ability out by like putting you in fight or flight mode, which is really scary. Like, are they scaring kids? Are they threatening kids' lives? Um, it gets into a whole other thing that I am probably not even going to go down this episode. Um, but essentially how they test people is on a random number generator, where you can use your mind mentally to start to affect the output of the Z score. And you can say I'm thinking about it now, and there's like a random number generator in the room, and it's spitting out ones and zeros, right? And I start thinking like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and the number generator starts to spit out more zeros than one. It's sort of like a proof point of how your mind can affect reality. This is how they can tell if you have the gift or not. Um, so I thought that was interesting. I also think it's interesting because he starts to talk about I'll just make this one point quickly. It's not really like the spiritual thing, but it is something he does talk about Michael Herrera, who I thought was full of shit for a really long time, but he's like, no, Michael Herrera is like the reason why I came out. Michael Herrera was like in Indonesia after an earthquake, and he was like helping, I don't know, maybe look for survival. I don't know. They were out in the jungle and they come upon this craft that's like massive and it's floating and it's got a platform underneath it and they're loading things onto it. And they've got people in there and they've got like drugs in there or he assumes that it's like drugs and human trafficking in that. And they're approached by this team of American accented English speaking operators who have guns and are like threatening their lives and who are like, we should just kill you now. Like, it's easy to get lost in these woods. Why are you here? Like, da 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 da. And, you know, Jake sort of like defends the whole thing and is like, oh no, like that's just one of our outposts. Like we're using those indigenous people to do some of this work, this psionic work. And he's like, this is just what it is. It's not like we're not human trafficking, like we're just recruiting people and we pay them very well, and it's all good. It's all good. Well, my question for you, Jake, is if it's all good, it's all good, then why were those people threatening the lives of American service members? Why were they like, we should just smoke you? Um, like if this is like a, run of the mill, you've got your Faraday cages with the mini split units on top, and you've got these people who are willing. to go because, oh, it's going to be such a great life getting paid really well and working for the US military. Like, why was it worth their lives or worth scaring the bejesus out of them? Um, Also, he says that he doesn't know anything about, like Jake says, he doesn't know anything about this. He's just like kind of connecting the dots between his own experiences and like the things that he's heard. So he doesn't really know what was going on there. But I think it's like, it's easy to let him off the hook because he's like, yeah, yeah, it's fine, whatever. But like, I think they're making a lot of assumptions there. I also am just like I'm not cool with them using kids either. And I'm not cool with them thinking that like their offer is better for Indigenous people than their own simple, beautiful lives that are in nature and living off the land. I think that that's maybe I'm being naive because yes, this is the world we live in, but I also think like that's making a big assumption, Jake, that like our lives are better than these people who live in developing nations. Um, so kind of getting back to the spiritual stuff, he says a good place to start is like how it's been described in religion, angels and demons. Jesse asks him, "Hey, are these good or bad?" And he said the answer is yes. Um, I would ask him because I believe, like based on my experiences, and he says himself, he said, "Look, I've never had bad experiences with this. Like I've had only beautiful experiences." And that doesn't mean that other people haven't had they've had bad experiences with this. Like people have had bad experiences with this. In my experience, the level of fear that you experience with the phenomenon is based on the level of fear that you carry within yourself. And so I would ask Jake if he thought like that your personal balance of love and fear is reflected in your experience with the phenomenon. And I think they like kind of touch on that a little bit, but Jesse doesn't really dig in hard. Nor does he really dig in hard about the kids. Like I would have dug in a little harder. And maybe he did and they had to like edit it out. I don't know. I think, he says, and I've always recommended this to people if they want to experience, if you feel called to experience this phenomenon, if you feel called to explore, please start a meditation practice. Meditation will help you with something called kenosis. This is a process of like letting go of your fear, letting go of shame, letting go of negativity. Um, Basically, it's like the emptying. This is something that Jesus went through as he was walking in his spiritual path. And you have to empty yourself of the densities of these dense physical emotions. Because when you think of emotions on a scale, of like good and bad emotions, the frequencies of the bad emotions are denser. They're much denser than the higher vibration emotions. This is something you can read about with Abraham Hicks. They have the like and also Joe Dispenza, they talk a lot about the like emotional frequency scale. Um, but essentially, meditation will help you in this kenosis. It will help you kind of empty yourself of these denser emotions. Your appetite will change, your outlook will change, your like need and access, like your need for access to nature will change. Because inherently, like to when you're really getting into this stuff, you start to discover that like nature is an incredible tool and things in nature are sentient too, and you can have conversations with those things. Like, I'm not gonna go down that too much yet. I will get there with it, but your whole outlook starts to shift when you start to meditate. And then once you start to really quiet your mind and you shift into listening mode, um, that's when you will start to receive the messages. And I had a pretty intense spiritual awakening this way, um, 2 years ago. And I will maybe share that in a subsequent episode. But I think it's really interesting that Jake, encourages people to get out there and have this experience. Again, it's what Diana Pasulka talks about in terms of gnosis. It's the knowing versus the like you're getting an explanation of it, but like you've never experienced it for yourself. So you really have to get out there and do this. Um, but again, be careful. Be careful with this stuff. You really want to ask for like the highest good. You want to ask for something that is in your highest good. You want to make sure you're protected because yeah, like we don't want to give the bad things power, but yes, they do exist. And it's important that you set an intention along with this for your highest good. Oh yeah, there were two other points that sort of relate to this, but not really. But he talks about how experiencers, um, including himself, have experienced heart murmurs. And I thought it was really interesting because oftentimes the spiritual the thing that happens spiritually takes on a physical manifestation. And in his experience with this like eight gon craft where he felt like he was possessed or embodied by some divine feminine entity, what a heart opening moment. And his physical symptoms were literally a heart opening moment, like a heart murmur. So I think I find that really interesting. That like the spiritual component and the physical component align, or the physical symptom aligns.
Escalation that started inside of me that seemed completely foreign. And the closer I got to the object, the more emotional I got.
Sad or ominous,
was,
or how
it was,
would you describe it?
It was, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful feeling. Fuck, but it's so weird. It's like that minor chord as a kid. It's like that sad beauty. It's like a first, a minor third, and a fifth. It was beautiful, but there was a sadness to it.
Did it communicate anything?
I didn't get a message other than like, I just felt like I was in the presence of my mother. It was like a feminine energy that was loving and sad. And
The last thing I'll say is that he also said that they were briefed whenever they had a retrieval, which I mean, like egg retrieval. Come on, guys, like egg retrieval. Hello. Um, that they were briefed on not only like the craft and like hazmat, if they needed like a hazmat team, but if there were SOBs, that stands for souls on board. Okay. They denote whether this thing has a soul. It's not like biologics, it's not non-human intelligence, it's souls. So I think that's really interesting because, especially because of what Bob Lazar talks about. And if you go back to his experience, he says that there's like a lot of information in these special access programs about religion and how humans are containers for souls. That's it for now. I'll be back with more because there is a lot more. There's so much more. I just really wanted to talk about some of the nuances that I picked up within that interview and continue connecting a few dots there. So leave any questions in the comments. I'm happy to answer them on subsequent episodes. And thank you so much for being here.